Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the NDIS Circle. I'm Dan McCutcheon, and today we have the pleasure of speaking to Amy Gray. Amy is the founder of Disability Culture Crew Australia. She started to raise awareness and facilitate change within the disability sector for the disability community through delivering disability awareness courses and presentations, mixed media workshops, and face-to-face consultancy. And I was looking at your website, Amy. This also led to you creating some gear, the Disc Crew apparel as well, which looks awesome with some empowering, strong messages promoting disability culture. Amy's worked in many roles, including as a nurse, a sector professional, and it also says on your website, Amy, that your greatest role thus far has been raising your daughter, who's a young woman now, Eliana, who was born with complex and profound disabilities. So you've sort of seen, you've got the 360 view of the NDIS, if you like. You've sort of seen the sector from both angles, haven't you?
Yeah.
So God, that was a mouthful. Did I miss anything, Amy? It's an amazing experience.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure to be able to sit on both sides of the fence. I think it's really probably almost essential to have a little bit of that within our sector, to have some of that lived experience brought in, because I think it actually changes the way people provide services or the way they run organisations. So it's been an absolute pleasure.
And that's so valuable. You're doing your consultancy work with organisations, isn't it? Coming in and being a sector professional and also a parent, you can sort of give that full perspective to organisations. Yeah, can you share a little bit about your sort of personal journey? Like obviously you've been, interacting with the NDIS probably from the commencement of the scheme, I imagine, and then you would have had interactions with your previous state government disability service system. How's that sort of led to you starting Disability Culture Crew Australia? Can you describe that journey a little bit?
It broke up a little bit there, Dan, but I think I got the gist of what you're asking. So it all started as very young mother, and I had a young child, and she was born with complex and profound disabilities. And that was a really rough trot. So you're coming from sort of not understanding disability and being thrust into the world, and the systems that were in place prior to the NDIS make the NDIS look very much like, and I've said it before, very contentious word, but it does look like a dreamland now. It's quite a supportive system. I think when all the boxes are ticked and you've got a good plan and good planners and good support, it's actually the most incredible, admired disability support system in the world. And people rave about it for a reason. And I would be one of those people to say that this is the most incredible system. It is definitely not where we started. And I think it's not where a lot of people within the disability community, there's a lot of people within that community that came from the old system. I guess that was an old system of you really should be happy with what you get. And it meant that families like mine, we really struggled. We lived on the poverty line because essentially complex disability is very, very expensive, and it wasn't something that was supported the way it's supported now. We're really excited to be part of the NDIS.
Yeah, I don't think that gets talked about as much as it probably could, that sort of financial impact of, some things are partially subsidised through the health system, and then you have some NDIS support, but there's often a huge gap for paying for assessments, diagnostic assessments and sessions with, expensive, really, highly experienced, skilled practitioners and clinicians. That's something I think that isn't talked about enough, isn't there? There's such a financial hardship. I see it with some of the families that we work with through my company, and often the parents aren't able to work because they have these huge caring requirements. It just has all these knock-on sort of effects, doesn't it?
Yep, 100%, Dan. Families like mine, every part or every facet of our lives are affected by Ileana's disability. And that's, it trickles on. And a lot of families out there have a lot of incredible skills to offer the community. So I've a nurse by trade. I've worked within the community. I've worked within the sector. I bring a lot. But carers and supporters aren't really supported in the workplace. There's not a place for us. So persons like myself, there's it's really hard for employers to have us in, because we can do sometimes 3 weeks in hospital for pneumonias, and that's not my fault, it's not my daughter's fault, it's not the employer's fault, but the workforce isn't really designed to support us. And I tell a story in some of our consultancy, and just to sort of prove the point that I had worked within the workforce for, I think, probably 7 years without a holiday, because all of my sick leave and all of my annual leave went to supporting my daughter. So carers like myself, we don't really get anything extra, which means that we work really hard within our own life managing complex disability. It's a fine juggling act, and then you're trying to be part and be meaningful, because people, I think I want to work, I want to be part of a community, I want to give back, but it actually makes it really difficult. And then people like myself sort of get, you're hard in a lot of ways by no fault of your own to be employed, because you need extra time, or you can get called and need to go and deal with epilepsy or seizures or falls and things like that. It's really tough for, I think, parents and carers and the informal supports, but they're, I believe, some of the most important people to bring into the sector.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Do you think with, like, obviously post-COVID world, and we're working from home, and there seems to be more of a, certainly in my experience, more of an accepted flexibility there for people. Do you think that's starting to change over the last few years? Do you think that employers and companies and sort of the employment system, the way people work, is shifting? And do you think that over the long term might give a bit more flexibility for carers like yourself and parents?
Look, it can only, but I think there's been a really very much a spotlight shone on the needs of the disability community, and the NDIS has come into fruition, and it's incredible. But I think there's a really big section that gets left out, and I wonder if at some point they can address the informal supports. Like carers like myself, we work really, really hard to support our participants, and we also work really, really hard to support the services that support our participants. And we also want to be giving back to the community, holding down jobs, having a meaningful experience ourselves. So I wonder if at some point there'll be a recognition to some of the informal supports. It's not like that for all informal supports, but my daughter's cohort, which is complex and profound, it'd be incredible to see some way, shape or form the work that they give back in the caring role to be somehow remunerated or acknowledged or recognised, because they really provided a lot of support for a lot of different people within this sector. Very important roles.
Absolutely. I know in my experience through my work, linking parents in with carer supports, we have a few organisations where I live. Often it's more around peer support with other carers, other parents in sort of social groups, and that sort of that sort of networking and sharing experience, and validating each other's experiences, and talking about different ways of doing things, which is amazing. Like, don't get me wrong, but in my experience, I've put that to some of the parents and the families that we support, and the parents are saying, hey, I'm already juggling a million different responsibilities, like you said, trying to work and attending appointments and hospitalizations. Like, I don't have time to go to a parent sort of peer support group, even though that sounds amazing. So I agree. I don't know exactly what the answer is, but I feel like there is a bit of a missing link there for carers and parents in particular.
Yeah, I think the disability community with the NDIS is being supported incredibly now, and I hope that transitions into the informal supports at some point, because irrefutably, disability, especially your complex and profound cohort, is profoundly expensive. And really sadly, from the rollout of the NDIS, now anything labelled disability seems to have jumped in price enormously, and that's got to do with the market and whatnot. So in that regard, I really hope that we see a bit of a trickle on, and so parents like me coming up now my time, I've been doing this 18 years, Ileana's 18, so I only hope that the parents that are coming up now don't have the experiences that I have had. Back in the day with me, I was a very young carer, so going to carers groups and carer organisations, it was often an older cohort. So to be a young carer with profound disability in a rural setting was really an isolating thing. Wow. And when you're fighting for basics like wheelchairs and enteral feeding, back in the day we would have to pay for a lot of that ourselves. We would have to pay for all the feeding sets. This 10, 12 years ago, they were $10 or $12 a day, and the formula was hundreds of dollars a month, and on top of all the medications. And you're right about talking about the specialist trips. My daughter saw a paediatrician every 2 weeks or every month, and it was just so expensive. And even now, if a doctor makes a error on a script, and if it gets sent to the chemist, this happened just this week, he made an error on the script. It was sent to the chemist as a private script instead of PBS because they needed to get an authorization, and it was just bypassed. And then the chemist just filled it and didn't worry that it was private. But it cost me hundreds of dollars, and I didn't even know because I didn't even see the script. So I'd said to the chemist, "Gosh, I'm just out of pocket hundreds of dollars?" And they said, "Well, yeah, the Webster packs are made up and it's a mistake and we'll have to get that fixed." It's just a constant thing. Every facet of your life tends to be impacted, and I don't think that the carer allowances and the disability support pensions even nearly touch it.
Yeah, and you mentioned, just picking up on what you mentioned there, you grew up in a rural area. Can you talk a bit more about that? And I think that area is so interesting, like regional remote sort of support within the NDIS, and like in my home state of WA, like we've got really remote areas like the Pilbara and the Kimberley, and I think getting services to those people can be really challenging. There's such a thin market of service providers up there, and with the way that the NDIS pricing arrangements is structured, you've got the sort of metro pricing and then regional and remote pricing. But for me, I haven't seen that that's been super effective in some of those really remote areas at bringing providers in. And I know when I worked at the NDIA as a planner, pretty naive, sort of mid-20s, doing a plan for 100, 200,000, and then for a young woman living up in the Kimberley, I think. And then coming back and checking the plan 4 months later, and there wasn't a single cent used. And I was going, what? Like, why is this? And then I travelled to some remote communities in my previous job to starting my business, and the penny sort of dropped. And I was like, I understand it now. There's no providers here. It's not a funding issue. It's actually a sort of a market issue, isn't it? Yeah. Do you have sort of any thoughts on that growing up in a rural area?
Well, we are not remote by any stretch of the imagination. Coffs Harbour is a relatively sort of bustling little city. For Ileana, it was access to specialist care. That was our biggest issue. So then it was consistent travelling to Sydney, which is a 7-hour drive. But when you've got a little person who's a chronic epileptic and who's fed via a pump, there's lots of stops along the way. So it's more than 7 hours. So it was consistent trips backwards and forwards, almost sort of monthly. It comes down to good advocacy at the end of the day. If parents can advocate for, if they've even got enough in their tank to advocate. And when Ileana had precocious puberty, for example, that is one of many areas that she's been impacted by. But that one meant that she needed to be on a really expensive drug. And the local hospital said that they did not write the script, so they will not pay for it as such. I was going to have to access that from Sydney, and they wouldn't send it, so I had to drive or fly down to get it. And her precocious puberty was not managed well. It was not able to be controlled, which meant I needed to go down every 4 weeks to get it. And then we had gastro endocrinology, we had urology, which was a chronic issue with us as well. So we were just backwards and forwards. So access to services locally was non-existent. And there was also no one to tell. Back in the day, no such thing as support workers, and they would release tiny little funding allocations. So one year we were funded $3,800 for the whole year. And when you've got someone with complex and profound needs, you really need an immersive experience with staff, and you're not going to leave a young person who has spent the first sort of 6 years of their life in and out of hospital in fairly serious situations with a stranger. So in that regard, because I was isolated, I didn't have a huge amount of family support. You know, the first many years of her life, even as a carer, with those respite services that they had back in the day, like you couldn't use them. And if you put them in for 2 hours, you'd be on the phone constantly because you'd be really nervous because your child's left with a stranger. You know, I think it's that experience, you know, that when people do get funded, I remember being funded for our first plan. It was that experience of a lack, but also it created this anxiety and mistrust within the service providers that were locally, that we didn't utilise our plan either. We didn't really know how to do it. I didn't know how to do it. Yeah, it's a tough one, and I think now they fund people appropriately, and we've got continuity of care. We can train people into services. I know within my daughter's budget, we can train people in and give them good immersive training into her service and what it is to be one of her support workers, which means that we can provide that, and then I can feel confident to leave.
Yeah, I think it's so good, like your messaging. Like often you see the NDIS, some of the messaging is often quite negative. Would you agree? Like in the media and in some of these groups. And yeah, I just 100%. See your message. Like I've seen you talking about the NDIS on other podcasts, and you're so positive about the difference that it's made to your life and to your daughter Ileana's life.
The important thing to remember is, like, it's contrast, isn't it? No matter where you are in life or what you're doing in life, and families like ours have a contrast. Like, we have come from real difficulties and real struggle. So we have lived the life of raising someone with complex and profound disabilities with virtually no funding, to then, like, it did take 4 or 5 years to get a good plan, and now we've got a good plan. We are confident in utilising that plan, and her life has absolutely changed, and my life has changed. I'm her primary carer, and so we've gone from having a child and living a life of financial distress, but also personal and emotional distress and anxiety, to now having incredible workers trained into those services. They know all the risks. They're monitoring it. She's safe. She's well looked after. Like, how could you not have the most intense gratitude for a system that does that?
That's so awesome. And let's switch gears a bit. I wanted to talk about your line of apparel. What sort of led you to develop the clothing? I was checking it out last night on the website. It looks awesome. Yeah, what sort of led you to developing that?
Do you know what? It was a comment made from my son. He is the most incredible young man. He's 20 now. And it was a comment made when he was about 14 or 15, and he just said he didn't want to go out with his sister anymore. And it wasn't that he didn't like her. He loves his sister. He just could not cope with the way people looked at her. And Ileana is actually beautiful, like visually, she's a beautiful young lady. She's in a wheelchair. She's got autism. She's in a wheelchair because she fatigues, but she can walk around, like she's fine. But he'd made that comment, and it just stuck with me. And he was refusing. We couldn't, not that we went anywhere too far, but he refused for a couple of years. And I thought it came down to that concept of normalising disability, and like, what can my role be in that? I'll do what I can to speak on radio. I'll go anywhere. I'll talk to anyone. But how can I impact this? Because I'm sure my son and my daughter are not the only people impacted by the general population, just maybe not knowing and not understanding disability. So we thought, well, why don't we slogan up some shirts? Some of the shirts have really powerful messages and they're really heartfelt. My favourite one is End of an Era, the Disability Inclusion Revolution, and it talks very much about like moving past the assumptions about persons with disability. Let's move past the history. Let's move into a new era of normalising disability, so that the more we see it, the more we talk about it, the more we negotiate with disability every day, everywhere, we realise, well, these people like my daughter, she was born like that, she's perfect. And a lot of people with disability are born that way, they're perfect. It should be something that, you know, we don't stop and stare at so much anymore. My other favourite one is the non-verbal range, which is I have a voice too. And, you know, there'd be a lot of support workers out there and a lot of parents and a lot of informal supports and people who work within the industry that just hate to have their participants not spoken to. Because there's participants out there like my little girl and they're non-verbal. It's just a communication barrier. That's all it is.
I love the idea of developing a clothing line, particularly because you know it's cool, like for young people, like you mentioned, like your son at 20 or teenagers that are sort of like at that age, like your brain is, you know, you talk about the concept of neuroplasticity, you're forming your sort of long-term attitudes towards people and how you sort of see the world and view the world. And I think a clothing brand that's cool, that is for young people, not just for young people, but that young people can wear, I think that's such an awesome thing for sort of fostering that disability culture in the mainstream, which is sort of your overall mission and vision, isn't it? So that's awesome.
Yeah.
And can you tell us a bit more about your training and consultancy service? What sort of organisations do you work with? Do you work just locally? Do you work all over Australia? What does that sort of look like for you? Do you have like a structure that you work from for each organisation, or you just tailor your support to each organisation and each industry?
We work with anyone and everyone.
Yeah.
The reason behind it was that the direct service provision in my own home over a number of years highlighted some big issues within the sector. And then I started working within the sector myself. I started working within managing a disability support program and getting feedback from parents and carers and getting feedback from support workers. And there's a common theme there. There's a lot of assumptions and misconceptions and misunderstandings about what it is to provide good service. But also the parents and carers are often not in a place sometimes to be able to give feedback about direct service no-nos. And I was finding myself, you know, documenting some of this stuff, and I thought, if I can put the stuff that I've learned, you know, I talk about bridging that gap between the disability community and direct service providers. There's a real gap there. I know that it's a bit of a contentious thing to say because there are a lot of service providers out there, they really want to do an incredible job. But what I say is, unless you've had direct service provision in your home and significant amount of that, like when you really need it, unless you've done that, it's really hard to put yourself in the shoes of a customer. That's not always possible. You can't just somehow roster 50 hours of direct service a week in your home for 3 months so you start to learn how to provide good service, what it's like to be on the receiving end of that. That's tough. It's tough to be a participant. It is tough to need direct services. And it's really tough to kind of give good feedback to be able to get good service. So I thought, right, well, what can I do? What can I do? I've got some skills. So that's how DC Crew was created. It was like, I want to be part of helping the disability community, but I want to be part of helping direct service providers as well. Like, the more connected they are to their customer, the better service they're going to get. And the better service that the customer, which is my family, the disability community, the happier they're going to be. And some of this stuff was really simple and easy to put in place. So that's how DC Crew got started. And we've got Breaking Barrier seminar series that we take into organisations, which has gone really well. There's lots of storytelling. It's a place where support workers, it's like a 3-hour seminar, and it changes essentially, like, it gives the participant perspective on lots of different things, from my experience, but also from what I gathered. I've got lots of storytelling from working within the community about what works and what doesn't work. So that's a really great thing that we do, but we're also working on, we call it a black belt program. So DC Crew, some of the main members of DC Crew, we're all jiu-jitsu grapplers. And we love this sport. So we thought let's tailor a program a little bit like that. Our DC Crew BDM is actually an ex-pro cage fighter. So we're that's part of our branding. That's part of who we are. We're a group of people within DC Crew that are just committed to doing incredible work for the disability community, but we're okay to do hard things. That's who we are as a collective. We're okay to kind of work hard. We're okay to have hard conversations. We're okay to push forward for change. So we've created this black belt program that we're going to be bringing as an online course to our providers, and it sort of goes from opening up, and it talks about my passion, which is good direct service. And I think, as you would know, that's all families want. They just want connected direct service. Other than good NDIS plans, when you look at the way to change families' lives is to give them good service. And that's actually where providers are tripping up. And it's because I guess there's a lack of understanding about what it is to be a customer. What is it? How many people out there can say, oh yeah, I've done immersive direct service in my own home. I know what it's like to wake up, to have support workers there every single day, 7 days a week, 12 months out of the year. Because I think that changes the way you think about service provision. It changes the way you talk to your staff. It changes the standards that you have for your staff. So I thought, look, what can I do? And that's something that we've put together, and we're hoping to be able to really influence some good change.
That's awesome, Amy. And so high level, if there's some organizations listening now, and we're talking about service quality, what's sort of the ABC you mentioned, listening to your consumers and your families that you're supporting? Is there there's some sort of top things that you see that organizations could sort of do better in that continuous improvement and service quality space, just at a higher level?
Yeah, 100%. I think intrinsic understanding of the customer base needs to come from the top and trickle down. And I think heads of organizations need to have probably the greatest level of integrity and understanding about some of the current issues within the customer base. And then the culture within a lot of organizations needs a bit of a reboot. And that happens at the same time as organizations start to get a closer grip on who their customer is.
So what you're saying is that service that you're putting out, sometimes organizations need to look internally first and look at the culture within their own organisation, and then they're going to improve their service quality.
100%. And that culture change, I think if providers could do it themselves, they would. But that often comes with interaction with the customer base, and it's not always possible. That's why DC Crew has created these things, so we can kind of be a voice for other families like ours, or other families that rely on service providers. And service providers rely on the customers. We're sort of their income. So it makes complete sense that the closer they are to being able to provide really, really, really good service, they get to the top of their game. We know this. The feedback is, it's all word of mouth anyway. So if I have an incredible service provider in my home, I tell people. There's lots of emphasis, and I get a little frustrated as the customer that, there's lots of emphasis on business promotion and business excellence awards and business coaching. And I've said it before, I think we kind of need to pull it back a little bit and start to have a look at the foundation, which is how close to your customer are you? Have you brought in that lived experience? Have you brought in the customer to talk to your staff, to connect to your staff? And I understand we're the only company I know of that has these lived experience seminars, but it's an incredible thing to put your staff in the shoes of a customer, even for 3 hours. It changes the way they work, and they learn things, and they see things through their customers' eyes that we've worked with staff that have been in the industry 20 years, and some of our storytelling is just ping, light bulbs are going on, and they're like, gosh, Amy, I feel foolish. I've worked in the industry for such a long time. I've got a lot of apologies to give. I've had people say.
We spoke about this when we caught up a few weeks ago, didn't we? The power of storytelling. And it's one thing to sort of read a policy or a procedure or do an online sort of training module, but it's another thing to actually hear a story from a family that's been through it and to sort of stand in their shoes, so to speak. I think that really connects with people, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And sort of, if there's a parent listening and you would have been in a similar situation, probably pre-NDIS, it's, a parent that's feeling overwhelmed. They sort of don't know where to start with the NDIS. They're new to the process and they're trying to support their child. What advice would you sort of give to a parent in that situation trying to navigate all of this?
Wow. I guess I can
Huge question.
I can only talk for my cohort, which is your complex and profound. The best advice I'd give them would be to just keep going and go for gold standard outcome, which is minimising the impact of significant disability on everybody's lives by being able to properly utilise a plan. And that comes with trial and error. So if you don't get a plan or you can't utilise it properly, keep trying. Keep reapplying. Ileana's been lucky enough to go under the complex care team, because prior to that, it was a mess. We're expected to understand terminology and jargon, and ultimately getting them up out of bed and keeping them well is way too much some days, other than trying to negotiate paperwork and get this report and get that report to prove that this is your life. It's a tough gig, and I think all I'd say is just keep going until you get it right, because you will. You will. It's a good system.
I love that. I think that's such a good place to sort of wrap up. Such lovely words, and I've learned heaps. You're talking about staff and having that training and stepping into the shoes of the family. Like, we do a sort of quarterly feedback survey with our families, but I'm just thinking, you've got me really thinking. I think that we need to do more, so I'm going to have a really big think about that. So I really appreciate that, and really getting close to the families and people that we're supporting. That's I think the number one thing for improving service quality, isn't it? So yeah, Amy, I just want to say thanks so much for coming on. It was such a joy to speak to you. I've learnt heaps and feeling really inspired. So yeah, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day, and thanks for having me.
You too. Thanks, Amy. All right, we'll see you next week, everyone. See ya. Bye. Bye, Amy.